Let's go ahead and begin on this special meeting of our city council. And I will ask Councilman Reynoso, sir, would you please lead us in Pledge of Allegiance tonight?
Sure. Everybody please stand. Your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilman. Let's get right into our meeting tonight, and we will ask our city clerk please to call the roll.
Councilmember Sanchez?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Here.
Councilmember Figueroa?
Here.
Councilmember Charette?
Here.
Councilmember Reynoso?
Here.
Councilmember Calvin?
Here.
Councilmember Alexander?
Here.
And Mayor Valdivia.
I am present, thank you. Let's go with public comments for tonight. Ms. City Clerk.
We have one public comment for tonight.
Good evening. This is for open session comments. My name is Jeanette McKay, and I'm a resident of the 7th Ward. I'm calling tonight regarding Measure S funds distribution. You sold the tax to residents as funding for the police. What new programs will you be funding to support the police? With the uptick of violent gang-related crime, we need to have a gang task force. We need crime prevention programs. My concern is the extra money brought in by Measure S will be dwindled away, paying for the mayor's lawsuits and pay-for-play schemes gone awry. It needs to be distributed to our police for programs that reduce crime and to our community for infrastructure repair that is desperately needed. Those sitting on the dais who care about our city, please make sure the police receive the support they need for the programs and that our city reaps the benefits of the new tax and is not wasted away in legal fees. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. City Manager, let's get right into our budget workshop. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, and good evening. Tonight, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to kick off the budget preparation process for fiscal year 2021-22. This is a pretty important budget for the city. It is the first one we've had in a while where we have experienced ascending revenues. So we're going to be looking to opportunities to augment services, do some additional capital improvements, and a lot of other things. We are going to have the budget presentation, the budget workshop presentation itself made by Barbara Whitehorn, our finance director, and then we'll of course have a robust discussion I expect at the end. But in the meantime, Barbara, if you would, please take it away.
Thank you, Manager Field. Mayor, members of council, thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you tonight. Mitch, if you could pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, so this is our first budget workshop. Tonight we will have a high-level view of what the budget is going to look like, what the focus areas are going to be in the general fund, and May 19th will be the day that we will really get into the details of what the packages are for the budget, what the budget is really going to look like next year, where we're going to focus on staffing up, what we're going to really focus on in the details. Tonight will be more of a 30,000 foot view, sort of a policy view for you as policy makers, whereas May 19th will be almost entirely about the budget. It's a regular council meeting, but that meeting, and this is for your benefit as well as for the directors who are here tonight to know that that meeting will be pretty much taken up by the budget, so there will not be a lot of room for regular items. that evening. So that's kind of a warning for everybody else. Hey, don't put a lot on that meeting. So next slide, please, Mitch. Presentation tonight, we're going to do a little governmental budgeting review. I know that you all know a lot about this as elected officials. You've looked into this, you've read our budgets, you've looked at these things, but I want to make sure that the people who live in San Bernardino really understand how the budget here works and how governmental budgeting is different from business budgeting, and why our budget is different and why budgets in governments are so important and how they are different from a business budget, and how they really matter and why they're such a significant thing every year for us. Then we'll go into our early revenue forecast, what our general fund focus areas are going to be, our fund balance forecast. We'll talk about capital improvement program focus areas, and then we have some time for discussion. All right, next slide, please. So in business, budgets are set in a very different way than they are in government. Revenue, if you're in business, are essentially goals. You're setting goals for revenue and kind of expectations maybe for investors, or if you're in a business that's focused on sales, you're setting sort of sales goals as like, we're basing our budget on what we expect our salespeople to do, or, we're anticipating these revenues because we're trying to, get investors to invest in our company because we want to do these new things in R&D or whatever. And the budget is sort of a guideline for expenses. And it's primarily an internal document that sort of guides the way that you're spending money and you're setting revenues, for your company. But in government, it's a very different document. It's a legal limit for the way that we spend. And it's a policy document that is set by you all, council and the mayor, for how we as staff can spend the money that you allocate. It sets revenue expectations, which obviously is based on forecasts and how we determine what revenue we anticipate we're going to receive. But those legal limits for spending are really critical. They're not just a guideline for us, but truly the limits for how we can spend money. And it has both an internal and an external focus. So it's not just a guide for staff, but it also has an external focus for the community, which should be a level of transparency for the community that says, this is how we are spending taxpayer dollars. And go ahead to the next slide, please. Minimally, when you're looking at a governmental budget, it should authorize the organizational spending, excuse me, I can't speak tonight, and it provides guidelines to control that spending. The best practice is that it's using the resources to establish the vision, the mission, the strategic objectives of the council and the organization. And it's providing transparency and accountability. And then you should have specific and measurable goals within the budget. And it should always reflect the values of the community. So your budget document, when it's complete and when you've developed the budget, it should reflect the values of the community that you serve. So the budget document for a government, for a local government like San Bernardino, should really reflect the community that we serve. It shouldn't simply be this document that sits on a shelf and gathers dust for a year. It should really guide us in our spending in a way that reflects what the community wants to see and the investments that you, as the people that are serving your constituents, want to see us do as staff to serve the community. Okay, go ahead, Mitch. Within the city, we're structured in a very different way than businesses as well. We have different funds that act sort of like individual businesses in themselves. We have governmental funds like the general fund and special revenue funds. We have enterprise funds that are usually self-sustaining. Like when you think of the San Bernardino Water Fund, that is a self-sustaining fund. And then we have internal service funds like the Information Technology Fund, Fleet Services Fund, and then we have like liability funds and other funds. And those funds any expenses in those are sort of spread out to the other funds because they are entirely supported by the other funds, and they basically provide services to the other ones. Like all of the tech services are basically supporting like general fund functions. Like finance doesn't function without Mitch, right? So Mitch's time, some of it is paid for by finance, some of it's paid for by the city manager, some of it's paid for by animal services. So that's how that works. But all of those funds that are paying for a part of his time are budgeted separately. And the general fund, and the one that we'll be talking about tonight, is the main fund of the city, and it's the main fund of most cities, counties, and governments. And go ahead, Mitch. So the first thing we're going to talk about is fund balance. And again, this is the general fund, which of course is the main fund of the city. And that's where administration, like the city manager, city hall, all of those main things, the police. When we talk about all the budgets of the city, we're generally talking about the general fund. So when we say the budget, we mean the general fund. You all know that. Probably not everybody listening knows that. So when I say that, I'm not saying that because I think you don't know that. I'm saying that because I know that not everybody watching knows that. But fund balance, if you all have seen this slide, except for the American Rescue Plan one-time funds, which have added significantly to our forecast for the end of year. When we started this year, this 2020-2021 year, we anticipated that at the end of the year, we would have emergency reserves of about $19.6 million at the end of the year, and just $1.7 million in economic contingency reserves. And those emergency reserves should be at 15%, and those economic contingency reserves should be at 10% of our general fund budget. So we know those economic contingency reserves weren't going to be at 10% of the budget, right? So we were thinking, okay, we weren't going to make it there, but at least we were going to have the emergency reserves in place. By mid-year, our end-of-year forecast was looking much better. The emergency reserves were fully funded. The economic contingency reserves were anticipated to be fully funded. And then we had what are called undesignated reserves, and that's the accounting term that we're required to use, which means reserves or savings account money that are not yet designated by council for a specific purpose. And then Measure S reserves, which are reserves from the Measure S funds that have been received by the end of the year of about $8 million. And then we will have received half of the American Rescue Plan funds by the end of the year. So that's about $42.45 million there. So that's a lot of money in the city's savings account at the end of the year. Go on to the next slide, please. This is our anticipated revenue, our projected revenue for fiscal year 21-22. It's quite robust relative to the last few years. I am pleased to be able to present this to you. We have not seen revenue like this in San Bernardino in a long time, and it is nice to see this, and it gives us a place to start from to be able to start rebuilding what we have had to cut so much over the past years just to balance the budget and keep the lights on. Now we're able to go back and say, okay, what are those critical services that we have had to cut that have really had impacts on the community that we want to go back and restore? So we anticipate in fiscal year 21-22 to have total revenues around $170 million. Now that number will probably increase as we get more information. We don't anticipate it will decrease, but at this point we are still refining that because more information will come in. This is early for us to be making those forecasts because you have to imagine we're, 16, 17 months out from this year end. Go ahead, Mitch. And here's a little analysis of these revenues. Charges for service We are still anticipating that they will be a little less than 2020-21 adopted budget. We have recategorized some of those charges for service. When we did the fee study, we put a lot of revenues into charges for service that really should have been in licenses and permits. So that's really just some recategorization. So when you see that decreasing, that's a recategorization. There is a little bit of COVID uncertainty with some of the charges for services that we are holding on to until we really understand when everything's going to open up and how people are really feeling about the state opening up completely in June. Just because everything's open doesn't mean everybody's still going to go back to completely, pre-COVID behavior. So we'll see. Fines and forfeitures. Right now, state collection programs remain on hold until we hear differently. We're going to keep our forecast for fines and forfeitures fairly conservative. Go ahead, Mitch. Franchise taxes, the Burtec fee adjustment will increase that, so we'll see an increase over last year's adopted budget. Intergovernmental, the annual contract, I do want to point out that the annual contract with San Manuel, I worded this very inaccurately. The contract is not decreasing, not at all. The contract itself is not at all decreasing. It would go down only because we anticipate that there will probably be fewer special events that they would reimburse us for because of possible fewer events because of COVID related behaviors, that people would have fewer special events, that therefore we wouldn't bill San Manuel for those, and so we would receive less revenue from them under the contract. So that's why we would reduce the amount that we would receive from them, not because they wouldn't pay us, but because we wouldn't bill them. And also in the 2020-21 budget, we had one-time CARES Act funds in there, so that amount will go away. Next slide, please. Licenses and permits, this one goes up because of the fees from the fee study that we recategorized. Other taxes, we're still anticipating transient occupancy tax to be down from 2019 levels, but we do anticipate them increasing from 2020-21 levels. How much these taxes will go up next year, we're not entirely sure, but we do anticipate some increases, and we'll adjust these numbers as we see more trend information going forward. Go ahead. Property tax, HDL is projecting, a 5% increase, about $900,000, and this is net of the transfer to the fire district. And sales tax is a 5% increase apart from the Measure S, and that's approximately $2 million. Go ahead. Utility users tax, as we've discussed previously, this is a consistent downward trend over multiple years. So we have reduced this from the 2020-21 budget by about $500,000. The Measure S sales tax, the HDL projects collections of more than $41 million, which is an additional $29 million in revenue, I believe, over last year's collections. If you'll go to the next slide. So moving into next year's budget, I've created 4 focus areas here, but I want to add that though these are the 4 focus areas that I picked out, that all of these focus areas include, and the city, of course, has a core focus on the health and safety of the community. I couldn't really pull that out by itself because it is the critical component of everything, and pulling it out by itself sort of makes it seem like it's a one-off, and it's not. It's something that needs to be part of everything that we do. So when you pull out health and safety, it's like, well, these things are health and safety and these other things are not, whereas health and safety needs to be part of everything that the city does. So that isn't its own thing necessarily. It's something that should be part of all of the activities and all of the operations of the city, whether that means the police department or parks or libraries or, the efficient management of whatever we're doing. So moving on from that, I think community amenities is a really critical thing that we have had to move away from in the last few years, simply because we haven't had the money to invest in critical services for our community, like libraries, parks and recreation, and community services that in particular serve people that don't necessarily have the money to go spend on expensive recreation things. You go to a park and you have a picnic, or you go to a library and you borrow books when you can't necessarily afford to do other things. And we have had to limit library hours. We've had to limit community center hours. We've had to cut programming. We haven't done facility improvements. We haven't made improvements in libraries that we have needed to make over quite a few years. So these are areas in which we plan to focus in the budget. Next slide. Deferred maintenance. This is something that has been an ongoing conversation I've noticed with council, particularly not last night, but in the last meeting. I know that Councilmember Calvin spoke specifically to service requests that have been outstanding for a number of years. And that's something that staff feels is really critical, that we deal with the backlog of maintenance requests that has built up over the years. We want to develop a deferred maintenance plan, address those backlogs, and have a timely response to new requests that come in. Not just deal with the backlog, but actually have a way to respond timely to requests that come in today. We don't want to address yesterday's response and then have tomorrow's and the next day's just continue to build up. So, get to a place where we're responding timely to everything, and really focus on sidewalk, traffic signals, and street lighting maintenance, so we don't end up with this ongoing deferred maintenance backlog that we never get ahead of. Next slide. Ongoing operations, information technology, implementing new systems to be more efficient and effective throughout the city. In human resources, implementing the classification and compensation study, to ensure that we can recruit and retain the best people for the job. And in finance, improving our grants management to ensure compliance with federal and state regulations. We want to be able to apply for as many grants as we can throughout the city, but what gives me heartburn is making sure that when we're applying for those grants, we are managing them to the absolute best of our ability, and we're really compliant with all those rules, because the last thing we ever want to do is not be and have to repay grant funding. Like, that's the worst thing in the world I can imagine. Well, I mean, not really, but, it's a terrible thing from an accountant point of view. Go ahead, Mitch. And then customer service and responsiveness to residents. We're public servants, and this is at the core of everything that we do. Community and economic development wants to focus on their permit and plan review turnaround time, their inspection response time. In City Hall, the responsiveness to resident calls and getting public information out there so people really know what we're doing, know who they need to call, and when they call, they get a response immediately, and they can get to the right person when they need a response. This is really something that, as public servants, we want to make sure we are giving the community what they need when they need it on every level. That's really critical to all of us, I think. So these are the focus areas for us as the leaders in City Hall. And then this next slide, I'm going to apologize before we even get there. Don't change yet, Mitch, because it's like my accountant happy slide. And so I'm just going to apologize for it right off. Go ahead, Mitch. because it makes me really happy, because it's like, look, we're going to do great next year, even if, even if we're going to have $170 million in revenue. So you can adopt a budget between $150 and $170 million and still have a very healthy savings account at the end of that. And this is what that slide is trying to say. And it's saying it in a much too complex way. And I apologize for that, because it's saying it as an accountant, because that's what I am. So, sorry. I'm laughing because I know I've like put together this slide in a way that is not at all friendly to anyone who's not an accountant. But what I was trying to do was say, if we were to adopt next year a $150 million budget, there is no question that at the end of the fiscal year, the city would still have a savings account of $130 million, anywhere from $100 million to $130 million in their savings account at the end of the year. If you adopted a budget of $170 million, you would probably still have $100 million in your savings account at the end of the year, which is really the point I was trying to make with this slide, and doing it quite poorly. So I apologize for my very accountant-like slide there. That was not well done on my part. And so, but the point that I am trying to make is that we are in a very fiscally healthy place, and we have an opportunity to really start taking small bites out of that. I hate that elephant thing, because it just sounds horrible to be taking bites out of an elephant, but it is like we're rebuilding Rome, and we can't do it in a day, but we can do it over a matter of years, and we can start doing it next year incrementally. And I think we have the savings account, we have the revenues, and we have the opportunity to start next year in the general fund with a healthy operating budget. And the next slide, we'll start talking about the CIP a little bit. The capital improvement program, and this is an important thing to keep in mind, relies on money that comes from different places than the general fund. There's approximately $34 million that comes from different funding sources than the general fund, so completely separate from the $170 million that goes to the general fund. And it comes from Measure I, from the gas tax fund, from development impact fees that we talked a little bit about last night, that we're going to pull together that report that Councilmember Reynoso asked for, from CDBG, from the Highway Safety Improvement Program, Cultural Development Fund, from a few other sources. But these are funds that are specifically designated for capital improvement things, and often for specific things like transportation improvements. Measure I is only to be used for transportation improvements. So that's what we use it for every year. We use it for street maintenance, and it's a 50-cent sales tax that we receive, and we use it for street maintenance improvements only. So every year we develop a capital improvement program that uses these funds, and we use it on things that the city desperately needs. Go on to the next slide, please. And our capital improvement program focus, of course, will be on critical streets, sidewalks, and storm drainage infrastructure, parks and recreation facilities, traffic controls and street lighting, city buildings, and internal infrastructure and information technology. We do have opportunity in this next year with, of course, Measure S, and then the American Rescue Plan funding, to make inroads in our infrastructure needs that we haven't had in previous years. Because that $34 million, as much as that sounds like a great deal of money, really doesn't go very far. It doesn't pave a tremendous amount of, roads. It doesn't, do a whole lot of storm drainage or build a bunch of bridges or, repair a whole bunch of facilities. It does a decent amount, but it doesn't address the tremendous amount of work that needs to be done throughout the city. So when we look at all of the other things that we have, what we need to do over time is develop a capital improvement program and start looking at those streams like Measure S and considering issuing long-term debt where we dedicate a portion of those revenue streams like Measure S that we know is going to be a consistent revenue that we get over time, that we can dedicate a portion of it to service on a debt issue where we would say we're going to issue $40 million in debt to do these streets or something, and we're going to dedicate this amount to pay off that debt over time. That kind of program, you can get a lot more bang for your buck, if you will, to accomplish a lot for a lot less money than spending the cash that you have today. So I think those are the kind of things that we might want to consider going forward. And there's certainly some forecasts and some, debt models that we will be bringing you over time to look at for a long-term capital plan going forward. And that concludes my presentation tonight. If you want to go, so now it's discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. City Manager. This is a very, as Barbara said, a very high view of it. I think the first 6 to 8 slides were very, very informational. Thank you, Barbara. Provided a lot of background to our new council members and certainly to the public. We will open it up for discussion. I think there's no vote here. There's no vote required tonight. And so this is a kickoff, what I would call a kickoff session for our budget. And so we have many more iterations of tonight's budget workshop. Again, folks, this is the beginning of our budget season. So we'll open it up to council members for comments or quick questions. And the floor is open. Councilman Alexander, sir, go ahead.
You're muted.
Director, I appreciate your work and this presentation. I just have a couple of calls, and I appreciate that you said vision, mission, and strategic objectives, values of the community. That's important because that's who we work for. That's who I work for. And some of the things that I saw in there, I saw missing, and I know this might not be the whole thing, so don't get mad at me. I'm just looking at when some of the things in my ward that when I ran, they said, I don't see anything here for small business. I don't know if we're doing small business grants or something to help those small businesses in our community to get them through COVID. Now we got $42 million. I don't know how that could be allocated, but if we can get some grants to help small businesses in the city of San Bernardino, I would appreciate it because I have a lot of business owners in my part of the ward, and I'm sure there's others in other parts. So if we can look at that and do some kind of grant, I have some great ideas that I could bring forth to you of how we can make that happen. And as far as responsiveness to the public, that should be department wide, not just in the CM's office and community economic development. That should be something that we should do for every department, should be responsiveness to public wide. So how we can focus on that as well. Mr. Tickmeyer, how you doing? As far as Parks and Recs, I have a very active Parks and Recs person. Are we ever going to open up the bathrooms to the public to use or facilitate those type of issues? So you don't have to answer me. You don't have to answer me, Jim. Just be known that I get calls like that. Are you going to open the parks? I know we have transit issues, but just be aware of that. I know as far as you guys put delayed maintenance, trees. I don't know where we go there with trees, but every time there's a windstorm, I live in an old part of town, and trees fall. I look at it as a public safety issue because the trees are very large where I live and around my area. So maybe we can address some tree issues if that's entirely possible. And I think I've said this before. Utility tax, utility user tax, that's coming up on the ballot. And I don't know if we can save on that or how that's going to work. Or because if it goes to ballot and we lose that revenue, how are we going to adjust for that? How are we going to adjust for that? So thinking ahead, how are we going to adjust for in case we lose that particular issue? And yeah, you know what? That's enough for now. Just that's enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Other comments? Questions, Councilman Charette, then Councilmember Ibarra. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I've got more notes than I think I want to discuss tonight, and maybe I need to talk to Rob and Barbara. The thing that I see missing here tonight, and maybe I've missed it completely. Well, first of all, I'd like to comment that I think I understood you to say that our budget meeting is going to be during a normal council meeting. And in my 13 years, we've never done that. Certainly the adoption has come, but the workshops have been 2 or 3 meetings prior to that. And this one is certainly a 30,000 foot level, but it seems to me for allocations and that's where I see we're missing here tonight, unless I've missed it. We've talked about the revenues, and Barbara, just help me. I'm going to be real simple. $150 million budget leaves us with $130 million in the bank, the savings account, so to speak. That's excellent. I came on here in 2009 during the downturn, and we've been in bankruptcy since most of my tenure. So we're in really very great shape. This is a very rosy picture, and an excellent report, by the way. Thank you. But what I don't see here is where the expenditures are. We've talked about all the revenues, and we're showing all the buckets of money, and it's a rosy picture. And not to be too pessimistic, but we could take that $150 million, add the $130 million on the savings account, and still wouldn't have enough to do what this city really needs to do for some of the deferred maintenance and some of the issues that we've had and things that we've had. And I get it. You said it. Rome wasn't built in a day, and we're coming back from the bottom. And but when do we start talking about where we're allocating the money? When we start looking at the funds that are coming in, the revenues, when do we start talking about how we're going to allocate them and to where we're going to allocate them, whether it be PD or parks or a finance department to give you 10 more employees or you get the point. So can you kind of answer that question? And am I missing something here? That we're not talking about expenditures, we're just talking basically about the revenues that we have coming. And it is a very positive picture going forward from what I've experienced in 13 years.
Let me take a crack at that.
Yeah,
please.
Fine, Rob, go ahead, please.
It's our intention we're preparing and distributing a budget calendar that will indicate when various things are going to happen. Tonight was just setting the table in a sense. The next step will be, we're in the process right now of working with the departments to develop the budgets for each one of them. They'll then be compiled into the global budget for the city. As Barbara alluded to, we are concentrating primarily on the general fund. But when we present the budget documents, they will include not just the general fund, but also the other special funds, like the reserve. The funds are allocated for transportation improvements, for example, SB1 and Measure I. So it'll be a comprehensive budget that will be distributed for comment. There'll be multiple steps in that process. Barbara had mentioned the May 19th we have a deadline. We have to, by the end of June, we have to have an adopted budget. We anticipate May 19th being presentation of the draft budget, the comprehensive draft budget. We would hope then to be able to adopt it by, I suspect by June 16th. Otherwise, we're having a special meeting June 30th. We've got to adopt it by the end of the fiscal year. So the next step, next iteration of the budget development process will be the preparation and distribution of the first draft of the comprehensive budget for the next fiscal year. So it's a multi-step dance, but what we did want to do is provide some context for where we are now, where we are as we start the process, which, as Barbara mentioned, is better than we have been in years past, better than we anticipated, and it gives us some, a good framework to work within as we develop the budget. But you can expect to see very, very soon a budget calendar, so you'll have a better handle on when various steps in the budget preparation and adoption process will be taking place.
So do I understand you to say that we're going to have some additional discussion and workshops that are going to be outside of a normal council meeting? Because not that the way we've always done it is right, but that's always been the way we've done it, just because it's such a monumental task and a lot of discussion, and it's usually been done in a couple of workshops outside of a normal council meeting. And I didn't get the feel that that's what we're going to be doing going forward. Am I right?
We're still developing a calendar. I can't say for certain, but we're trying to limit the number of special meetings because we've been having a lot this year, and we'll see. But if there is a need for an additional workshop or an additional discussion, absolutely we'll do it. This is vital. This is probably the most important budget the city's had in a really long time, because there are so many things we can move forward on. And to Councilman Alexander's point, we have money. We have the rescue plan money that needs to be allocated as well. That'll be sort of a special subset of the budget in its own right. So this is going to be a multi-step dance. I think in a perfect world, what we would love to be able to do is what some other jurisdictions have done, is at least consider doing multi-year budgeting, meaning we adopt a 2-year budget with the understanding, of course, that there are modifications. There are modifications to the budget all year long, especially at the quarterly report stage. So that'll probably be part of the discussion too. It looks to be, knock on wood, it looks to be that we are entering a period of a little bit more certainty with respect to the revenue side of things. There's always going to be unexpected expenditures, but certainly on the revenue side, we're hoping that we are entering a period of relative calm and predictability. So, Barbara, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that's accurate, and I think the multi-year budgeting would provide a lot of stability to staff and to council as far as understanding what's happening all the time. This budget in particular is quite challenging to develop, not only because we're coming out of a challenging time for San Bernardino. We're coming out of this really difficult bankruptcy and many years of a sort of really low place, but because we're coming out of COVID, making those revenue projections has been really challenging. And then trying to figure out, what do we do with expenditures, and what are really the critical needs? What is the staffing level that puts us in the right place versus going back to a staffing level that is too high? So normally, I would be much more comfortable. I would have wanted to come to you all with workshops much sooner than now. But because information is just trickling in, for revenues, and information is just it's harder to come by just because of the environment right now. It's been a little slower to develop, which has kind of delayed some of our really getting here. So I think that's part of why we're a little more reluctant to kind of cram in a lot of, workshops on you all at once. But I think the city manager is right. Like, we also don't want to put you in a position where you have to make a bunch of decisions all at once. We want you to have those robust discussions and really understand what you're adopting.
Okay.
Well, if I could just ask one final question.
Okay.
Just one quick final question. We've been operating on about 130 million. We now have this number of 150 million. That's a $20 million increase. I guess part of my question is, and maybe you can't answer it now, maybe this will come as we go along, but how do we divide up that $20 million, not to mention some of the other one-time funds and things like that? That's where I'm interested in looking at, we've been operating on a skeleton budget. We've been operating at very skinny, haven't had enough food on the table, so to speak. We've been eating beans and now we want to certainly not go to the stake, but we want to see where we're going to be able to start improving that bounty on the table. And all the departments are depleted. All of the departments need more help. And when do we start talking about where we're going to, and maybe this is for you, Rob, but when do we start talking about assigning, talking about what's the most important department? They're all important, of course, but where do we really need to focus? Where do we really need to focus with this extra $20 million, let's say? Does 10% of it go here and 20% of it goes there and 30% of it goes there? That's kind of my question, and maybe tonight's not where I'll get that answer, but that's where I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Charette. Councilmember Ibarra, you had your hand, and then we'll go to Councilmember Kelvin.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to go slide by slide. Thank you, Ms. Barbara, for your report. Whitehorn. On page 20 of the slide, when we're talking about deferred maintenance, I did notice that the streets wasn't listed in there, but I'm seeing them under the CIP instead. Is that because of the Measure I? Or would the streets also be included? Because I have some really bad streets in the second ward.
Oh, yes. Streets are absolutely under deferred maintenance.
Okay, awesome. And yeah, because my colleague Councilwoman Calvin mentioned at one of the previous meetings, I too, when I came on board, I had on my CRM list items that had been there since 2008 that had been waiting to be fixed. So I too hear that concern. So thank you. So that was page 20. Page 21 for human resources for Ms. Eddy. If we can also look, I know a lot of our departments are short-staffed. I think this is a great opportunity for our city to look into the maybe renewing or getting a bigger contract with CEO, the Center for Employment Opportunities, internships, apprenticeships, contractors, maybe even some hiring agencies to work with the city so that we can get employees to help fix our city and respond to the calls that we're getting at the call center, for example, or at any other department that could help the departments with staffing needs and responsiveness. Page 22, the one thing I didn't notice for customer service and responsiveness to residents, one of the biggest concerns that I'm hearing all over the city is response from our police department. If we can find ways for them to answer quicker to the calls, that could be something that maybe us as council can work with our police department, but that wasn't on the list, and I think it's very important. That has been a number one concern since before I even ran for office. I was the neighborhood watch block captain, and we dealt with it for several years before I even ran for office. And then, page 24, regarding the capital improvement project, I have an idea, and maybe I'd like to bring it out to the staff here. When we're talking about street maintenance, I've noticed that a lot of our bus stops are not being maintained currently by Omnitrans. Maybe do an agreement with Omnitrans that the city will take care and clean up those bus stops, with maybe a caveat to provide, I don't know, free bus passes for residents of the city to help also their ridership. Maybe we can partner up with them in that aspect and help them at the same time. Because my understanding is Omnitrans is also dealing with a lot of staffing cuts on their end. And then I think that is all. My main focus would be the capital improvement projects. That would be my main focus for my colleagues. If you don't believe that fixing a street or street lights makes an impact, I'll tell you, the residents who live near Crestview that just recently got paved, they noticed it. They noticed it because it had been over 10 years of them complaining of potholes resurfacing on that street. And now they drive, they don't feel anything. They are happy. And I would like to see that happening all over the city, not just in my ward, but if we can focus on even fixing the streets, because a lot of cars are getting damaged with those potholes. And the street lights, maybe we can look into having solar powered lights. I know in my area, for example, copper wire theft is huge. And that's why the East Street lights between Baseline and Highland have been constantly being put down. Somebody's playing with the wiring there. So we can look into maybe solar lighting. That would be amazing for our city. Those are all my comments. I love the report. I know for trees, I know my colleague, Council Member Alexander mentioned about the trees. Last I remember, we had a contract with West Coast Arborists, and they were supposed to go on a rotational cycle throughout the city. I don't know if that contract is still being renewed or not, but we can look into that. And I know they had quadrants, so what years they would service what areas of the city. Other than that, my other last question, and this will be maybe for City Manager's office. I want to confirm if the Measure S committee has met recently to give their input or seek community input.
We have, I'm checking my calendar, I think it's the 19th.
Yes, it's on the 19th. There's a scheduled meeting, and they will be doing a series of meetings. So all through this time frame, when we're coming to you with information, we'll also be working with the Measure S committee on that funding source.
Excellent. Happy to hear that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Kelvin, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We appreciate it. And I appreciate all of my colleagues' comments as well. But I really want to go back to what Councilman Charette, the question he asked, I don't think that it was really answered. May 19th is 6 weeks away. And we said that we need to have it done by the end of June. That will be another 6 weeks away. When are we going to be meeting? And I think that needs to be established here. We cannot just go right into May 19th and then go right into approving the budget, particularly that we have 3 new council members on board. We need to be able to, and everyone else, this is a lot of money that we're talking about. We need adequate time to be able to sit down and discuss with being provided the necessary information from all departments, because like Councilman Charette said, they were cut bare boned, and we have to now build them up, and we have to all take that time to decide where that needs to go. So I really would like to have that question answered before we're done. I did not see anything about homelessness involved in our areas and how we're going to address that in our budget. I do believe that needs to be something that we are allocating funds to make sure that we are assisting in every way possible in those areas. And I think that my colleagues have covered the majority of the items that I wanted to discuss. So thank you very much.
Council member, thank you. Very good. My recommendation to staff, Mr. City Manager, is perhaps you can provide a date or a calendar. What I would have liked to seen here is kind of a roadmap of what's going to occur, so we can prepare. You know, obviously council members have full-time jobs, and we need adequate preparation. So I would concur that we need a schedule on an 8.5 by 11, lay that out for us so we can prepare. And if you would help us plan so we can make appropriate arrangements for our personal lives, family lives, etc., that'd really be helpful.
That's going to be distributed next week.
Okay, thank you. And the notes on the homelessness issue, Councilmember Kelvin, thank you for bringing that up tonight. We appreciate that. Council members, Council Member Reynoso, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a lot. I appreciate everybody covering basically anything that we could right now that's in front of us. I want to kind of emphasize city manager. If we're thinking about purchasing a lot of, power sources and things like that, new vehicles, let's talk electrification. Let's talk about saving money. It's like Councilwoman or Mayor Pro Tem Ibarra said about the lights. That's like the no-brainer. Science is there. You don't need a scientist to tell you you're saving money. When you implement those, they're brighter. Let's just be energy efficient with this because we have a lot of money, but let's not go crazy. We have to control this. And so those are my only real comments. I appreciate everything else. And Barbara, I appreciate the presentation. I'm looking very much so forward to the impact fee report, where our development fees are going and how that's chalked in and considered in the budget, what line item that is, because I'm sure that should be a lot of money. I'd like to see, and a lot of people deserve to know where that's going. Thank you.
I'll get to you in just a second, Councilman Alexander. I do have questions. Barbara, I'm trying to find you. There you are. Can we please put up, maybe IT, please, slide number 5. This is on packet page number 11. Barbara, you referenced the last two on the far right of the bar chart there, economic contingency reserves. This is slide number 5 or 6. Keep going. There you go. Thank you. Economic contingency reserves, you suggested that it should be 15% of the budget, is that right?
Yes.
And that the emergency reserve should be 10% of the budget.
Yes, of the adopted budget. So the adopted budget, I believe, was 130,679,910.
Okay, thank you very much. On packet page number 12, the next slide, I want to take a moment to pause and celebrate. We have come a long way, folks, and I think the council has had it suggested this, and I want to reemphasize this is a great opportunity to really invest in the backlog and deferred maintenance of our city. If in fact the lower right-hand quadrant, that would be a projected revenue of 170,413. It's a great opportunity, and there's a lot of money here, and we need to be wise. I would concur that we need to invest in our infrastructure and deferred maintenance. Ms. Whitehorn, you suggested then that there was an opportunity. If Mitch could go to slide number 15. Thank you. Deferred maintenance, public works. I think the bottom line is we have to go back to basics. We have to understand the fundamental role of city government. We're here to protect. I think, Barbara, you used health and safety. I like to coin the term life and property. Our number one function of city government is we've taken an oath to protect life and property, and that's expressed through the effects and expressions of city government through police and fire, as well as all of the other sundry items here that provide for that protection of life and property. The deferred maintenance of our city is significant. We need to really get back to the basics of city government, and I would highly encourage our city council to continue to stay focused on that public work aspects. Moving on to item number 6, slide number 17. I want to also encourage, I know that our city manager has come forward with a suggested policy on employee responses to emails and phone calls. Policy adoption will be forthcoming on a manual of our responsiveness to the public that we serve. It's very imperative that we serve our community with that responsiveness and attention to detail on our emails. And so I thank our city staff for making those efforts forward to make sure that we codify policies for our employees, to make sure that we do respect the public that we do serve and respond accordingly. I'd also want to encourage that on the community economic development on this same slide, I think we need to do everything possible to ensure that that department has the necessary tools and resources to get their job done. There is a chokehold. I've been in conversations and discussions. There is a chokehold. We've identified it. We know where it is. And so my expectation is that we somehow resolve the situation either through personnel or software or a combination of the two. We have the necessary resources and tools to do it. Now, regarding packet page number 20 and slide number 20, Councilmember Ibarra hit it right on the head, and I think most of our council will agree that our capital improvement programs is the fundamental core of public works and what we do as a city. This is the expression of public works to the public on infrastructure improvements. And I would certainly agree that we need to continue in earnest to focus on these back to basic principles. Ms. Whitehorn, you suggested that you would issue long-term debt, is my note here on this slideshow. Can you help? I mean, I think I know what it means, but can you unpack that for us, please, as to how would you issue long-term debt and what are the tools necessary to create that pathway so we can get to work and perhaps bond against it and get more bang for our buck, as you suggest on this slide?
Well, essentially what you can do is say you have $2 million this year that you could spend. So $2 million this year could get you, 2 miles of street, say. Or you could use that $2 million to fund debt service on $20 million, which could get you 10 miles of street. So you could do 10 miles of street and then fund and then issue debt that you would pay off over the course of 20 years, which would be, say, the life of that street. It's actually longer than that, but say the debt would be 20 years. So you're paying that over the life of the street, which is then being paid by the users, essentially, of that street over the lifetime of that street. So it's like assigning the cost of that street over the lifetime of it, rather than paying for it today when the asset itself, the street, is actually much longer lived than just today. So it's not like, buying a meal that you eat today. It's almost like buying a house and you're paying for it over the time that you're living in the home with a mortgage. So it's like
amortized over 30 years.
Exactly. It's the same kind of thing, that you're paying for these big assets that you're going to pay for over the course of a long period of time, because they have these long asset lives that go for a long period of time.
Okay, in layman's terms, is this what we would call bonding, a public works bond of some sort?
Yes.
Where we identify that with council approval and then somehow submit that to Wall Street?
Yes.
And just a quick way to provide a commercial, our bonding rating has gone up and improved.
Yes, it has.
And I would like to see a option, Mr. City Manager, as to what that might entail and what options might we have if the council were to proceed in that direction. But public works is a very, very big, important issue, and I love seeing streets repaved. I think our constituents, the taxpayers, the business corridors, when we talk about Baseline, E Street, Waterman, Tippecanoe, when we talk about Orange Show, 40th Street, University Parkway, we're talking about major street corridors, Baseline and Highland Avenue, that need major love and attention. So I'd like to see if we have the capacity to research it and bring it back as part of our budget discussion. Let's get back to the basics and let's start paving some streets, and let's do it in earnest. And I just want to say thank you. This is great. I share the exuberance with you, Barbara. This is great. And Freddie and I have been here for some time, and this is a great report. We'll open it up back to council members for any final concluding comments or thoughts.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Council Member Ibarra, when you said about Omnitrans does have a section that picks up trash around their bus stops. and this is open up to any council member. And I have the number of the individual that helps because I've had some problems, and I don't want our public works to be picking it up. So offline, let's go talk to Omnitrans instead of putting our people when it's Omnitrans's responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. All right, well, it's about 6:38 p.m. We want to once again say thank you. This is preliminary kickoff. I believe that, Mr. City Manager, does this conclude the presentation from staff?
It does, yes.
Okay, thank you very much, City Council members. We appreciate your time, and we thank the viewing audience and public. This will go ahead and we'll adjourn tonight's meeting, and we thank you once again. Have a good evening.